to start tonight with some dramatic and headline-grabbing testimony from James Comey. Not the jaw-dropping congressional testimony he gave in the summer of 2017, after he was fired as FBI director by President Trump. That's when he detailed disturbing mafia-like conversations with the president. That's when he memorably told Congress, "Lordy, I hope there were tapes." Also not his testimony a few months earlier while he was still FBI director, and he announced publicly for the first time that the FBI was investigating any potential coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian operatives who attacked the 2016 election as part of the FBI's counterintelligence authorities. No, this is different. Super dramatic James Comey testimony. This is testimony he gave a full decade before all of that. To give you just an idea of just how long ago that was when James Comey gave this testimony in May of 2007, this is when George W. Bush was president. This was when Barack Obama was a first-term senator. This is when Rudy Giuliani was the leading Republican presidential contender. What? But James Comey told the Senate Judiciary Committee a story that was absolutely riveting. And it was about a confrontation he had had with the George W. Bush White House when he was working in the Justice Department as Deputy Attorney General. He was, in fact, acting Attorney General because the current Attorney General at the time, John Ashcroft, was in the hospital. And the story was about how he, James Comey, and some of his colleagues, including Robert Mueller, who was then the FBI director, they intercepted top White House officials who were trying to get something done around them, around their authority, by showing up at the hospital bed of the seriously ill Attorney General.
Sounding like a movie plot, it happened 3 years ago in this Washington, D.C. hospital. Lying in bed there, the Attorney General, John Ashcroft. Standing at his bedside, Alberto Gonzales, then White House counsel, and Andy Card, White House chief of staff. They wanted him to approve an extension of the secret NSA warrantless eavesdropping program over strong Justice Department objections, even though Ashcroft was seriously ill. Also there, the number 2 man at Justice, James Comey, acting Attorney General. He said today the scene started a crisis that nearly brought mass resignations from the Justice Department.
I thought I had just witnessed an effort to take advantage of a very sick man.
He said Ashcroft recited reasons why it should not be approved. Later that night, Comey says, an agitated Card summoned him to the White House.
I responded that after the conduct I had just witnessed, I would not meet with him without a witness present.
Eventually, Comey said President Bush diffused the crisis, directing changes to the program. Senator Charles Schumer commended Comey for opposing the man who would become his boss as Attorney General.
The story is a shocking one. Makes you almost gulp.
There were several gulp moments in that testimony. Comey testified, told the Congress that day that when he heard that White House officials were heading to the sick Attorney General's hospital room to try to get the ill Attorney General to sign off on this warrantless surveillance program that the Justice Department had already said they wouldn't sign off on, Comey and FBI Director Robert Mueller both raced to the hospital. Robert Mueller ordered FBI agents at the hospital to not allow Comey to be removed from the Attorney General's hospital room under any circumstances. But after that hospital room confrontation, President Bush initially decided he would just go ahead with this warrantless surveillance program without Justice Department approval. It was only when Comey and Mueller and a whole bunch of other DOJ senior people threatened that they would resign, they actually drafted their resignation letters, that Bush finally backed down and the program was changed to account for the legal objections to it at the Justice Department. And that story about the hospital room confrontation, it's a story you may have heard, right? It is a story that has resurfaced several times in recent years because the players from that drama have all come back into the public eye in one way or the other. James Comey, of course, went on to succeed Robert Mueller as FBI director. And then after Comey was fired by President Trump, Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel to investigate Comey's firing, among other things. And regardless of your feelings about Robert Mueller, regardless of your feelings about James Comey, I know you have a lot of them. I mean, regardless of your feelings about the Bush administration's warrantless surveillance programs and all the government surveillance programs that have descended from them, I think that hospital room confrontation story remains compelling and keeps getting told over and over again Because it is this clear and dramatic story of government officials standing up against something they viewed as illegal, right? Blocking the White House and White House officials from doing something they believed was illegal, going to physically dramatic extremes in order to stop that thing from happening, threatening to resign unless the White House did the right thing, forcing the White House to do the right thing by their integrity and by their standing up and by their being unafraid of the consequences. And so it's a parable about the character of those people involved in it. And it's important as they go on to becoming interesting and important characters in American history. It's also something that's important for us to tell ourselves as Americans in terms of what we value and expect and respect when it comes to integrity and bravery from public officials who are in powerful positions. I think we as Americans just like to know that that sometimes happens. And so here's something else to know about that time and about that incident in American history. James Comey and Robert Mueller have been sort of the stars of that story every time that it's been told ever since. But James Comey and Robert Mueller were not the point of the spear. They were not the first people at the Bush Justice Department to raise the alarm about that illegal warrantless eavesdropping program that the White House had started. They weren't the first people to try to stop it, basically, to put their own jobs on the line in order to stop it. When an Inspector General's report about that whole debacle was finally released to the public in 2015, we learned that the first person at the Justice Department to raise red flags, to try to stop it, to insist that that program had to be put on a real legal footing or it could not proceed. The first person who actually did that, who threw himself on the machinery, was the head of the Justice Department's Office of Intelligence Policy, a man who was named James Baker. Not a high-profile position at that time, not a high-profile Justice Department official, but somebody who played an incredibly important role and did it first in that standoff. From that Inspector General's report, quote, James Baker told us that while standing outside the Justice Department one evening several weeks after the 9/11 attacks, he was approached by an FBI colleague who said, quote, there's something spooky going on, that it appeared domestic communications were being collected without a warrant from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and that, quote, some FBI personnel were getting nervous. Baker said several weeks later, while reviewing a FISA application, a particular passage in that application leapt out at him. He couldn't figure out where the information that was being cited in that application had come from. He surmised that it might have come from this program that he had not been read in on, but that he had been warned was something spooky going on. James Baker chased it down alone. When he finally convinced someone to tell him what the heck was going on, he says he immediately felt that that spying program was on shaky legal footing. It was legally problematic. And he refused to take those surveillance warrant applications to the court unless the court would be informed of the program. Those judges were being asked to sign off on surveillance applications. They actually didn't know where the information in those applications was coming from. And so he insisted that the court be told. The White House resisted. At least one official at the Bush White House tried to have him fired for him resisting it. But James Baker at the Justice Department was convinced he was right, and he was stubborn. And eventually he won. The White House had been intent on going around that court and overtly denying the court any information about that new spying program. And they ended up getting forced to inform the court about it because of the way James Baker stood up to it. I mean, more officials, he convinced more officials that he was right about it. More officials raised objections. The program ultimately became public. Congress intervened to craft surveillance legislation. And again, you may not be a big fan of the legislation Congress ultimately created about this. But before people like James Baker started raising red flags and saying, no, I'm not signing off on this, I'm not letting this go forward, this was a spying program that was being run more or less off the books without any court oversight at all, just by the White House. The Inspector General report on this spying program, which was a program called codenamed Stellar Wind. This report was put together by inspectors general from 5 different agencies. On this matter, it concluded with this quote: we believe that the Justice Department and FBI officials who resisted the pressure to recertify the Stellar Wind program because of their belief that aspects of the program were not legally supportable, those officials acted courageously, and at significant professional risk. The inspectors general highlight several people by name, including Robert Mueller and James Comey and James Baker. Single them out by name to say they acted, quote, in accord with the highest professional standards of the Justice Department. When James Comey became director of the FBI years later, he tapped that same James Baker, praised for his integrity in that earlier confrontation with the Republican White House. He picked James Baker to be his general counsel, to be the top legal official at the FBI. That is a position, of course, of immense importance and trust at that agency. The person who serves as general counsel is almost always handpicked by the FBI director. And so James Baker was there at the very top of the FBI, the top legal job at the FBI, when the country first started to realize within law enforcement and intelligence circles that Russia was attacking the 2016 election for the purpose of trying to get Donald Trump installed in the White House. And they were simultaneously becoming aware that there were numerous, somewhat inexplicable contacts between a particular presidential campaign, which happened to be the Trump campaign, and people associated with the Kremlin at the same time that Russian attack was going on, right? And that must have been a remarkable thing to go through, right, in 2016, to be in a senior law enforcement, senior intelligence leadership role, right, to realize what was happening. I mean, you'd have to call on all of your years of experience, all of your personal gumption, right, to deal with this absolutely unprecedented situation, to run a counterintelligence investigation into a hostile foreign powers operation targeting our election while that election was ongoing and while there appeared to be numerous unexplained contacts between the party in the United States that was benefiting from that foreign intervention and people associated with that foreign power. What is even more remarkable since then is how all of those people who were in all of those leadership roles at the time that attack was happening, they were realizing what was going on, they were starting the investigations into it. All of the people in senior leadership, law enforcement, and intelligence roles at that time have just been systematically destroyed by the Trump administration ever since, right? I mean, James Comey, of course, was fired. His deputy, who then became acting FBI director as soon as Comey was fired, Andrew McCabe, got fired, got his pension reduced on the way out the door, has been referred for possible prosecution. Peter Strzok was the lead counterintelligence agent in the FBI, a veteran Russia counterintelligence agent. He gets forced out, his reputation destroyed. Bruce Orr, the senior person in the Justice Department on Russian transnational crime and money laundering. He escapes by the skin of his teeth, still technically has a job right now, but was moved into a basement filing room or something, and is basically daily attacked by the president and increasingly by Republicans in Congress as well. Former CIA director, the man who was CIA director at the time of the Russia attack and at the time the investigation into it started, John Brennan, gets his security clearance yanked by President Trump. He also put out a whole list of other Obama national security officials whose security clearances he might try to yank, right, including the national security advisor at the time of the attack, the deputy attorney general who became the acting attorney general who came to the White House and warned them about their national security advisor being compromised by Russia, the director of national intelligence at the time. He puts them all on a list, this enemies list, saying they might have their security clearances revoked too because of their, quote, baseless accusations of improper contact with Russia. And I don't need to mention that there are now more than 100 pages of a report by none other than Robert Mueller that say those accusations were far from baseless. I mean, all of these people with all of these decades of leadership experience, with all of this subject matter expertise, the people who are in all the key roles of trying to understand and assess and help the country understand and assess the attack by Russia, people who are trying to understand that attack and thwart it and get to the bottom of it, the people who led that effort are all the ones who thus far have paid the price for it. And that includes James Baker, who was the top legal official at the FBI. The president attacked James Baker by name several times for his ostensible role in this witch hunt in the Russia hoax. Fox News and other conservative media outlets have repeatedly pilloried James Baker for supposedly being part of some plot to mount a coup. James Baker left the FBI a year after James Comey was fired. In all of that time of being a punching bag for the president and his supporters, James Baker could not speak publicly about what he actually did as a top national security official during the Russian attack. He couldn't talk about the investigation into Russia and into the Trump campaign. He couldn't say what he knew. But now he can. With the Mueller report completed and released to the public, with his testimony to the Judiciary Committee on these matters having been released to the public by Republicans on that committee somewhat inexplicably, former FBI General Counsel James Baker says that he's able to speak out on these matters that have at least now become public knowledge. And I mean, we're about to find out, but it sounds like what he wants the American people to know, above all, is that despite the unprecedented situation, despite the pressure of the time, he says the FBI did things by the book. You should have confidence in what they did. Today, at an event at the Brookings Institution where he's interviewed by Benjamin Wittes from Lawfare, James Baker told Wittes that had the situation not been done by the book, had it been an improperly launched investigation, quote, he would not have tolerated it whatsoever. This was James Baker today, quote, I have gone to the mat in the past in my career with stuff that I thought was inappropriate. There was no way in hell that I was going to allow some coup or coup attempt to take place on my watch or any conspiracy to do anything unlawful. No way. And of course, when James Baker says he would go to the mat over something he sees as unlawful, he would threaten to resign if he needed to stop it. There's reason to believe it. He has cashed that check before, right? He has done it before. And now tonight he's here to talk to us about what it was like to be at the top of the FBI during this remarkable period in our history, what it's like to be targeted in the way he has been since then. James Baker joins us live in studio next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.